So our final section of the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali starts at book 2, Sadhana Pada, but we're going to start all the way at Sutra 1. So can you please turn to page 75 in your books? Book 2, Sutra 1. Book 2 is the portion on practice. And the first sutra is one to memorize in English. You don't have to memorize it in Sanskrit, but this is how he opens the verses on practice. Sri Patanjali says, accepting pain as help for purification, study of spiritual books, and surrender to the Supreme Being constitute yoga in practice. Accepting pain as purification, study of spiritual books, and surrender to the Supreme Being constitute yoga in practice. This sounds like the last 3 of the niyamas: tapasya, svadhyaya, ishvara pranidhanam. So in Sanskrit, it actually says tapaha svadhyayeshvara pranidhani kriya yoga. So the practice of Kriya Yoga is tapasya, svadhyaya, ishvara pranidhanam. Accepting pain as help for purification, study of spiritual books, and surrender to the Supreme Being. This is how you practice yoga. Now, I love to look at this sutra exactly in reflection to the serenity prayer. Please grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Accepting things you cannot change is the same as surrendering to the Supreme Being. Total acceptance. What comes, comes, and what goes, goes. So, Carmen, I know you've just entered. We are on book 2, Sutra 1, page 75. What comes to us, we openly receive. What wants to leave us, we openly let that go. We accept that which we cannot change. This is another deeper practice of Ishvara Pranidhanam, and a nice one, especially if you internally cannot resonate with the idea of surrendering to a Supreme Being or to the notion of a God. If that does not resonate with you, then take it in this: accept that which you cannot change. And then the courage to change the things you can, well, this is tapasya. The austerity, the burning, the discipline, the effort required to change and make those proactive changes. And the wisdom to know the difference comes with svadhyaya, the study of spirituality, the study of your highest self. Knowing your true self gives you that discriminative discernment, the wisdom to know when to practice and when to apply non-attachment. And this is Kriya Yoga, exactly the same as Sutra 12, book 1, but told in a different way, told with a different formula and given a different name. Now, a lot of people look at Kriyas in a very different context. Under the Hatha Yoga umbrella, there are 6 Kriyas, and the Kriyas are known as cleansing techniques. And this involves Nali Kriya, the stomach turning, Jalaneti, cleansing of the nasal passages, Jaladauti, cleansing of the stomach, Kapalabhati, the skull shining breath, Tratakam, cleaning out the eyes, and the tears coming out is a way of releasing a lot of stress hormones out of the system, and Basti, enema. Those are the 6. I like to always say sweating is a 7th Kriya. because you're taking out a lot of toxins. But that is under the Hatha Yoga formula. If you do the Art of Living, they teach you Sudarshan Kriyas, which is a combination of breathing and mantras and meditation. That is a totally different Kriya. Again, a cleansing technique. But Kriya Yoga actually means yoga in action. I know that Shelley practices her own set of Kriya Yoga, a totally different combination. Self-Realization Fellowship teaches yet another formula of Kriya. So in Sri Patanjali, this is what he calls yoga in action, Kriya Yoga. So remember, same name, different practices, different packaging, but same goal, same result, right? There's no need to have this, my way is better than your way. No, my way is the way that I need to do it for myself. And by all means, find your own way that you need to do it for yourself. But understand it in the context of a bigger picture, and it allows you to go deeper into whatever practice, system, tradition, or lineage you've been initiated into. So let's go into this notion of Kriya Yoga one by one. Tapasya, accepting pain. It is very difficult to speak to others about accepting pain. But when we consider pain in our lives, most of the time, all our worries and all our stress is in anticipation of feeling pain or having some sort of suffering. If we actually sit with the discomfort and sit with the pain and sit with the suffering, it actually is minimized. The majority of this mental strife comes in resisting the pain or the suffering, or trying to avoid the pain or the suffering, or worrying when it's going to come, worrying when it's going to go. A very simple example is having a headache. We start to feel a headache coming on. And initially, we have such an initial resistance that we immediately run and grab the Panadols or have a cup of coffee. And we never stop to actually consider the pain and sit with the pain and try to understand the pain. And I do this frequently. I actually suffer from migraines regularly once a month. I believe it's hormonal. And on days that I'm really busy, yes, some days I run for the painkiller. Especially if I have a TT and the migraine comes on, I really need to do that. But then other days where I have a more calm schedule, I try to sit with this pain and understand it. And then you realize, what is the body feeling? Is the body feeling dehydrated? Is the body feeling exhausted? Are the muscles fatigued because you've been carrying equipment around all day long? And it's only when you stop and consider that, that's where the growth comes. Well, yes, I overdid it. I carried too many things. I didn't drink enough water. And I'm actually quite hungry. Fix the root causes, massage out the shoulders, and the problem goes away. Whereas when you mask the problem by taking a painkiller, yes, the problem goes away, but the root cause of it doesn't. So the mind sits at ease, but the body has not resolved itself. And this you can see happens with a lot of sickness. We have to function in this world, especially if we are moms. Sometimes we just don't have room for getting sick. We have to still look after the household. But allowing ourselves that time to say, well, what does my body need right now? My body needs water, rest. It needs to lower the stress response, because stress creates inflammation. Tension, worry, this creates inflammation. This creates a whole bunch of symptoms. when we can address that root cause, that's where the growth happens. We realize we have to set a boundary for ourselves. We have to. And that's how we grow, when we understand ourselves. And most of the time, when we go through that process of unpacking our discomfort, unpacking our suffering, we realize our shortcomings. I didn't look after myself well enough. I wasn't going through my life mindfully. How many times have you injured yourself in a yoga class? It's because you weren't mindful and you didn't listen to your body. How many times have I said that? In some cases, yes, the teacher would have come and manipulated you and caused an injury. But again, what is the lesson here? Speak out, say no, and have a boundary. But what gets in the way? Our mentality. I need to please the teacher. I want to show that I am worthy of being a good yoga student. That is still coming from ego, those attitudes. And we serve nobody, and we get injured as a result. There's no glory in being the least flexible in the room, but there is peace of mind and peace and ease of body. And this sometimes is the pain that we have to accept. The humble pie. Eating humble pie. I will share with you a piece of creative writing that I wrote. I usually don't share my creative writing, but I'm very happy to share it on the WhatsApp group. And I wrote it about eating a slice of humble pie and what it does to your whole system. Humility is very bruising for our egos. Accepting that we aren't perfect is very bruising. And it's this very fine pendulum to find a balance. Because we're either with a mental attitude of entitlement. I deserve this. Why is this not happening to me? Surely I have worked hard enough. Why is this not coming to me? That is kind of you're puffing yourself up. So you're speaking from a place of entitlement or thinking from a place of entitlement. And then the universe always teaches us everything we need to learn, and it brings us back to grounded. But instead of accepting it and saying, okay, ego's feeling bruised, I'm feeling this bitter taste of humble pie. I can accept it. What are the lessons? And how do I move forwards? We go to the complete opposite end of the spectrum, which is, oh, I suck. I don't deserve anything. I am stupid. Shame on me. You don't deserve it. There's no wonder you're not successful. La, 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 la. The voice that puts you down and the voice that puffs you up, both are voices of the ego. Being overly sensitive and taking things so personally and being so easily offended, that is the space where we are acting and reacting from our egos. And those interactions are very good. They build up our spiritual muscles while keeping the ego in check. This is how we become not so resistant to everything that comes. Things can just pass through. Sometimes it's funny when you get a very big piece of criticism, and it'll always come from the person that is the nearest and dearest to you, be it family, friend, colleague, or spouse. And those are sometimes the most hurtful, but they are the most truthful. And sometimes we always find excuses to justify that behavior. But if we listen to it, and if there is some truth in there that we recognize it, it's perfectly fine to turn around and say, well, I need to get back to you on this because I need to really go back and consider everything that you've told me. And then you have that choice. Well, number one, this is this person's perception. What role have I played to make sure that this person has that perception? Fine, I can take responsibility for X, Y, and Z. But I cannot take responsibility for making this person happy, and I cannot take responsibility for being perfect, so I'm not going to accept that. But how much do we ever give ourselves the time and space to sit down and process that? Guess what? That's what your meditation practice daily is there to do. That's why the yogis say, have a practice in the morning, have a practice in the evening. When your day is over and you sit and you meditate, you can unpack the events of the day so that when you sleep, your mind is fully at rest. And then you wake up in the morning not burdened by these mental stresses. This is accepting pain as help for purification. And you have to go through the burning. Once, I remember visiting Yogaville, the ashram in Virginia, and we had a satsang, and it was question and answer time. And one of the students had posed a question. I don't remember the question exactly. I remember the answer. But the question was along the lines of, you know, I've come to visit Yogaville and people seem to be arguing and not acting in accordance with the yogic principles. And I feel that, you know, it's a very hypocritical community. And you'll notice this when you go to a holy place. Sometimes the followers there and the disciples in the community, they're not this ideal of happy, peaceful. There's a lot of gossip and back talk. It happens in any small community. And Sri Gurudev had answered very cleverly. He said, you need to think of an ashram like a laundromat. Nobody brings clean clothes to a laundromat. You bring your dirty laundry into an ashram to clean it out. And don't expect that it's going to be all lovely and peaceful and like a honeymoon. Absolutely not. The clothes get tortured in a laundromat. First, they get doused in soap in the washing machine and they're tossed here and there to get all the stains out, to get really clean. Then you throw them in the dryer and they're going around and around, and it's hot and it's hot and it's hot and it's burning out the impurities and cleaning the clothes. And then finally they come out and then you iron it even more. This is the purpose of laundry. And we don't separate every single piece of clothing. We put colors together, lights together, delicates together, and they rub and they scrub. And this is why people you encounter in an ashram will rub and scrub you. Don't think that by running to an ashram, you're running away from life. It'll happen probably even more concentrated at an ashram. So for us as householders, the rubbing and the scrubbing happens with our work colleagues, our family, our friends, our spouses, our siblings, our children. This is the rubbing and scrubbing. But if we can get it in a household life, oh, it's so much easier in an ashram life. You don't need to run away. You don't need to go anywhere to find it. This is the burning. That's why tapasya is called to burn. So I'm going to flip to the book, to the next page. Sri Gurudev, in his commentary, gives reference to the 17th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita. Start again. Sri Gurudev gives a reference to the 17th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita. And the Bhagavad Gita is another classic text of yoga, but it is told in a very Hindu culture and religious context. But if you go beyond all of that, the fundamental teachings are the same here in the Gita, in the Bible, they're all there. But one of the things he wants to highlight in this chapter is something that Lord Krishna speaks about to his student, Lord Arjuna. He says, Lord Krishna says, those who practice severe austerities, not enjoined by the scriptures, who are given to hypocrisy and egoism, impelled by the forces of lust and attachment, who are senseless, who torture all the elements of the body, and me also, who dwells in the body. Know thou these to be of demonical resolves, which means, in the name of practice, if it is so rigid that it causes harm to yourself, there is no yoga. You are not only harming your own body, but you are harming the progress of the inner self that resides inside your body and mind, your soul. So there is no need to torture yourself. Now, in the context of this, when the Bhagavad Gita was written, you can imagine these sadhus that were emaciated and only lived on air and prana and tortured themselves on the sides of the road by lying down on nails and poking things through their body. And you see that if you go to the Kumbh Mela festival, you see all these crazy yogis that employ all these forms of austerity and self-torture. However, this is not yoga. It is too extreme. Now, bring it into 2020, into a modern context. Fasting, detox, rigidity, right? Any sort of neurosis around your practices, it's the same thing. Anything that is too wound up, too tight, too rigid. Yes, it is great that you follow a vegan diet. It is absolutely wonderful. This is your practice of ahimsa. But let's say just by accident, you consume an animal product. What then of your inner peace? What then of your inner peace? And this is the practice of tapasya. Once Sri Gurudev said, the yogi will not be surprised if the graveyard opens and the dead bodies crawl out as zombies and come and approach them. No, the yogi will still maintain his peace of mind because he understands. I laughed. I thought that was really funny. So moving to the end of this paragraph, I've underlined the last line in that paragraph, which says, self-discipline is an aid to spiritual progress, whereas self-torture is an obstacle. This is how you find the balance. Self-discipline is an aid to spiritual progress, whereas self-torture is an obstacle. Sri Gurudev calls it, take it easy, but not lazy. And it's very easy to say, okay, I'm going to be easy with myself. Finding that fine line between taking it easy and not lazy, accepting your vulnerability, but striving for excellence. Where does that balance lie? Only you know that balance point. And until then, it'll be trial and failure, trial and error, back and forth until you find that balance. So continuing with this sutra, I'm going to continue in the commentary. Lord Krishna divides the true austerities into 3 groups: physical, verbal, and mental. So your practice of tapasya has 3 categories. So the physical austerities of the body, he classifies worship, purity, straightforwardness, celibacy, and non-injury as the austerities of the body. This includes hatha yoga and pranayama, because your hatha yoga and your pranayama disciplines can be a form of worship and purity, straightforwardness, celibacy, and non-injury. Now, celibacy, again, this was written in the context of teaching monks. As a householder, we can look at celibacy as moderating our life force, moderating our pranic drains, conserving our sexual energy, not overindulging, but finding a balance that works with our life, not overindulging in talking and overindulging in all these media and social media, and reining it in. These are the austerities of the body. So Sri Gurudev says brahmacharya or celibacy means control, not suppression of the sex desire or sex force. If the mind can be filled with sublime thoughts by meditation, mantra repetition, prayer, study of scriptures, and contemplation of the sexless pure self, the sex desire will be devitalized by the withdrawal of the mind. On the other hand, suppressing the sexual desire will attach you to it again and again and again. So first work with the mind, right? It's either body into mind or mind into body. Find a pathway that works for yourself. So next, Sri Gurudev explains the Bhagavad Gita. And the next one is verbal tapasya, the austerity of speech. There are 4 categories. Speech should bring tranquility and be truthful, pleasant, and beneficial. So whatever comes out of your mouth, make sure it is tranquil, truthful, pleasant, and beneficial. This one practice alone is a massive practice of tapasya. For mothers who are working from home and managing homeschooling, make this one practice. Try it. Vow to yourself, in the next 24 hours, I vow not to raise my voice. You might make a mistake. It's okay. Failure is a way to grow and learn. Failure gives you that burning of tapasya, accepting that pain as help for personal growth. I strongly suggest you try it. One day, no yelling, no losing your patience. Easier said than done, but just that one day is, if you can reach that one day, you've definitely mastered your mind. You have definitely mastered. Try it for half a day first. Try it for 1 hour at a time. So there's a Vedic teaching that goes, Satyam bruyat, priyam bruyat. Speak what is true, speak what is pleasant. Sometimes when we deliver the truth hurts. So we need to find a way to soften our words to deliver a truth that may hurt someone. And this is important. But also we need to find the balance of not beating around the bush. Sometimes we tell this big flowery story before getting to the point. Straightforward. Clear is kind. Clear is truthful. Being frank, but with a lot of love in your heart. This is the true yogic way of verbal tapas and verbal communication. Be clear. And sometimes, if you are not clear in yourself what you want to say, then be quiet. Get that clarity within yourself first before speaking. Which finally brings us to mental austerity, described by Sri Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita. He says mental austerity is serenity of mind, good-heartedness, self-control, and purity of nature. This is how you accept and train your ego and how you can grow personally. So this is a huge practice of tapasya. But not as severe as we may think. This is all the burning of the ego to purify it. Not that we are impure people, but our egos are not in check. And we got to give ourselves the opportunity to put our own egos in check on our own terms, not on anybody else's terms. Which brings us to Svadhyaya. Svadhyaya basically asks you to reflect, to use the principles of Jnana Yoga, self-inquiry, the yoga of wisdom, and to look at yourself honestly to find out the truth. Am I willing to learn from this pain? Am I willing to learn the lessons and move forwards? Or am I going to be stuck in this cycle? How many times do you make the same mistake over and be like, not again, I'm just going around in circles with my life. Why do I have the same relationship patterns? And this is where the self-inquiry comes. Well, what can I take responsibility for? Where am I attached? This is the opposite of blaming other people. The second we deflect, the second we try to, that only happened because this was the scenario, and that was the scenario, and this because of this. If you're making excuses, you're not in self-inquiry. Yes, we cannot control the weather, but we can control how we cultivate the seed. And in order to find out where we went wrong, we need to look at exactly, did we water that plant every day? Probably not. Let's be honest with ourselves. The minute you put yourself as a victim, you have given away all your personal power. You become weak. You have no spiritual force. So remember that. The peace inside of you that is always dwelling, the true self that is always inside of you, it cannot be affected by anything. The scriptures say, especially in the Bhagavad Gita, they say the self cannot be cut or burned or wet. The true self inside of you, the essence inside of you. If you look at this verse from a scientific perspective, they say that energy cannot be destroyed. Energy is just transferred. That was actually the one lesson in my physics that actually stuck with me. Energy cannot be destroyed. It is just transferred. Just like your true self. But it takes that study to understand it. It takes the effort for self-inquiry. Which brings us to the final one, Ishvara Pranidhanam. And we've covered it already, but Ishvara is this notion of God, and this is your individual interpretation of what that form of divinity is. So for me, let's say growing up, it was Lord Shiva. That's who I considered my Ishvara. Now it's a little bit evolved. Ishvara is a supreme being of energy. I look at this big kind of intelligence that governs the universe. That is my form of Ishvara. So it changes and it evolves. So have faith in that spirituality, that essence that you have inside of you. Have faith in it. Have faith that the storms pass. Have faith that the lessons that are coming to you are there to help you grow. When this happens to you, you look at your suffering in a very different light. You actually thank the universe for bringing the suffering to you, just like I did when I came out the other end of my anxiety attack. I was so grateful because now when I speak about it, I know, number one, what my students who have gone through anxiety attacks, I know very physically the physical symptoms, the sense of doom, the inability to function in the world when you are completely crippled by it. I get it. I get it, I get it, I get it. And I say, I'm so grateful to have had that. So grateful. Because now it makes me that much more of an authentic teacher when I speak to it. Whereas before, I was talking about anxiety without really understanding it. And so I take it as a blessing. And the scenario and the situation that caused that anxiety, while I couldn't take responsibility for it, I also had to see what part I played in it. What part I played in it, maybe I didn't work hard enough to prevent it from happening. I had to take ownership of it. But what could I do in this physical moment? And every time I was consumed by that fear and that anxiety of that scenario, I switched my mind and channeled that nervous energy into building my online school. That's really what I did. I said, you know what, Hersha, you cannot rely on anybody or anything. You have to look after yourself. You need to be prepared that if everything crumbles, if the ground crumbles beneath you, at least you've done your bit to help yourself. And I sat with where I wanted to go with my yoga organization, with the teacher training. And I said, you know, I am only very limited in my capacity in what I can give because I have responsibilities at home. So why don't I start recording some of my classes? Why don't I start building an online school? And literally 3 years ago, that's when I started. And anytime the stress came to me, I flipped and I said, okay, the time I can spend mulling this over in my brain, I'm going to take that time and put it into building something. That is Pratipaksha Bhavana. It means I didn't feel that anxiety. I didn't feel that pain. I intercepted it and I didn't allow myself to entertain it. Because what you think about grows. The more you think about something, the more you manifest that in your life. So that was a combination of accepting the pain, learning from it, and growing from it. Studying myself to know what my capacity was, and letting go of that which I could not have control over. So it doesn't mean you don't prepare for a rainy day. It doesn't mean you don't plan for the future. You do it knowing that you cannot control the weather. You cannot control the outcome. So this is a huge, huge sutra. But let's move to Sutra 2. They help us minimize obstacles and attain samadhi. So tapasya svadhyaya ishvara pranidhanam. Living your life according to the serenity prayer, accepting things you cannot change, having courage to change the things you can, and cultivating the wisdom to know the difference helps you minimize your obstacles and attain samadhi. So simple, right?